And we have two people in my office. We have, no, you can't, let me undo my background. No, because I have my background on, so you can't see the people. There we go. Okay, so now you can see Michael
Good
over
morning.
here and Eric
morning.
over here. All right. So it's good to see everybody today, and you can feel free to unmute to say hello if you want or not. I appreciate your flexibility. I appreciate everybody's flexibility today with the timing, just because I had to be with the religious school students today as the first day of religious school. So from now on, we'll be at 9:30. Well, let me say it this way. If we have class on a Sunday, it'll be at 9:30 because there could be a couple of Sundays. Well, I know for sure that on Sunday, November 3rd, we will not have class because that is the day, that my youngest son gets married. And he's not getting married here. He's getting married in New York. So I'll be otherwise
Occupied.
occupied. Yes, that's right. That's right. And they also, he and his fiance have asked me to officiate at the ceremony. So yeah. So that's November 3rd. Also, the day after Rosh Hashanah, no, 2 days after Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is Thursday, Friday, then it's Shabbat. The day after that, that's Sunday, we're going to have our Tashlich at Lake Needwood. So won't be able to have class that today. Right. Well, no matter, yeah, so if it's raining hard, we'll be here like we've been before, but we're going to have a Tashlich program no matter the weather that day, so we won't have class then. So those are 2 Sundays that I know that we will not have class. So the big thing, what I wanted to talk about today is my idea for what we will study this year. So those who are attempting to do the Daf Yomi, the page a day of Talmud, know that we're in the midst. Today is page 75 or 76. I don't remember. I read it, but I don't remember if it was 75 or 76 of the tractate Baba Batra. So I have been actually intrigued by what we're studying in Baba Batra, and just in terms of the content. Today's page is different than the content. There's some bizarre midrashim about Leviathan, but for the most part, Baba Batra talks about property and how to split property, how to, when you're selling property, what does that mean? What's automatically included in the sale? What do you have to actually articulate in the contract to ensure that something is included in the sale, not included in the sale? What do heirs inherit, things like that. So I'm suggesting that we take a look at that this year as a difference to the past couple of years where we're talking about a relationship with non-Jews, because I've heard from some of you that maybe you want to study something different. So before we say absolutely yes, let me share my screen to the Koran edition of Baba Batra. Here we go. Okay. And it's only $10 if you want to. You go to Koran, and you go to Koran. If you Google Koran, Koren, then you browse under Talmud, and then there's digital Talmud. So that's the NOE, and the E has like an accent mark on it, the Noe edition, so digital Noe or something like that. And then you have to scroll down to find the Baba Batra Part 1, which is $9.95. So it's an easy download if you want to. I'll be sharing my screen all the time, and that's the site, yes. Yeah. So let me just get rid of this. There we go. Okay, so introduction to Bava Batra. So Bava is Aramaic for gate, and Batra means last. So there's Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Batra. You got the opening gate, you have the middle gate, and you have the last gate. So tractate, so now reading from the introduction, tractate Bava Batra was originally part of a large tractate called Nezikin, meaning damages, which was composed of what are now the first three tractates in the order of Nezikin. So remember, Talmud or Gemara is a commentary on Mishnah. So Mishnah is 6 volumes or orders. The volumes are called Seder, just like the same word for what we have on Pesach. So Seder meaning order, and it's the order of tractates that are in each order. So Nezikin means damages, and it deals with civil law mainly. And then you have the Mishnah, and then the Gemara is the commentary on the Mishnah. The commentary and the Mishnah itself are included in what is the Babylonian Talmud that we study. So Tractate Bava Batra was originally part of a large tractate called Nezikin, meaning damages, which was composed of what are now the first 3 tractates in the order Nezikin. Bava Batra was the third and last section of the super tractate. From this placement, it derived its name, which means the last gate. The first 2 parts of the original tractate Nezikin were Tractate Bava Kama, meaning the first gate, and Tractate Bava Metzia, the middle gate. I didn't read ahead, I knew this before. Each of these 3 parts has its own central topic. Bava Batra differs from Bava Kama and Bava Metzia in 2 major ways. These first 2 parts examine halachot, the laws, that at least in part relate to prohibitions, whereas Bava Batra, primarily occupied with civil law, includes the halachot of contracts, property, and estates. Furthermore, much of what is recorded in Bava Kama and Bava Metzia is based on biblical verses and their rabbinic interpretations, whereas the halachot discussed in Bava Batra are mostly rabbinic ordinances based on the sages' understanding of human nature, societal conventions, and the need to establish limits and guidelines to regulate business relationships. Okay, so that in and of itself is fascinating, because the rabbis take it upon themselves to derive laws that they expect people to follow as much as the laws that are directly derived from the Torah. Okay, so it's one thing to encourage people to observe Shabbat or keep kosher. Those are in the Torah. But it's another thing to say you should write your contract this way, because contracts aren't in the Torah. So it's just interesting. And the question of people buying into it is still a question. We really don't know in the time of the rabbis, from the Mishnah and the Talmud, we don't know from other sources whether people, just a second, Jack. We don't know from other sources whether people actually listen to the rabbis. Or we also don't know whether there's an alternative teacher out there or a group of teachers who are teaching something else. We only know from the Mishnah and the Talmud, and we assume that most people believe it because it's still studied and practiced today. So just like history, history textbooks are written by the victor, so too our religious texts are written, and the ones that endure are from the section of society that endures the most. And it's just interesting that if you get the New York Times hard copy, the magazine of the New York Times today had an article about Shakers, and that there are only 2 living Shakers left. It's the oldest denomination in America, right? It's from before the Revolutionary War, and there are only two living Shakers. There are people who are friends of Shakers and volunteer in the Shaker community, but it's an article. It's a fascinating article about this community in what's called Sabbath Day, Maine, on Lake Sabbath Day. And it's really I didn't get to read the whole article, but it's just interesting because you're supposed to commit to a life of celibacy there. So it's not, you're hoping that other generations will be converted to Shaker because they're not going to be a self-perpetuating denomination themselves. So anyway, so I just thought of that because it looks like all we know, most people think about Shakers is the furniture, but that was their business that they did in order to sustain themselves. But thinking about it, which denominations are, which religious groups are the most prominent ones, and the most prominent ones get to have more of a say over society in terms of values and traditions and things like that. Jack, what were you going to ask?
I was wondering, in that period of time when the rabbis were having all of these discussions and creating all of these circumstances in the various documents, aside from them and their students, how about the lay people? How well educated or how well learned were they in what was in the Torah and what was in the
We have no idea. We have no idea. We
so
really
they
don't.
could have been an illiterate mass, or they could have been.
I don't think the lay people were illiterate. I really don't think that. But I could be biased because I like to think, and it has been taught, that as opposed to Catholic laity that were intentionally kept illiterate, Judaism never intentionally kept people illiterate. And in fact, I mean, opening day of religious school, the mitzvah is to teach our children. And if we ourselves can't teach our children, we hire people to teach our children the contents of Torah, not just the 5 books of Moses, but Jewish tradition, how to read Hebrew. So, you have stories from the shtetl of itinerant melamdim, tutors, teachers who would be hired by the community to teach, or families to teach their children. And this was average people, not the wealthy people, but average people were teaching their children how to read and what it was all about. And even women were learning as well. And there's a famous collection of midrash written specifically for women called Sena Ura'ena. It's written in Yiddish. Go and see, it means. So men and women were learning basics.
But you're speaking of a period of time that's much more recent.
I know. So I'm just saying. So
That period of time was mostly agrarian.
But Jack, I don't know.
Work from. I see.
I don't know. All I know is that rabbis taught in the synagogue on Shabbat. And who came to synagogue on Shabbat? Was it just their students, or was it other people too? I don't know. Jesus taught in synagogues around the western shore of the Sea of Galilee. Did average people go, or did students go? We don't know for sure, and you can't really rely on stories that were written in the sources themselves, because they're not written by independent people. They're written by the very people who are writing the sources, and teaching. So Jack, we just don't know. We don't have independent sources to know. What you can make guesses about how many people could fit in a synagogue, right, by the size of the synagogue, but that doesn't answer who came.
No, but I was thinking that if it was an agrarian society, most of the folks who worked on farms or whatever ranches worked from sun up to sundown,
Right.
didn't have much time for studying the books, from
Unless it's on Shabbos. But how much of the
except for
agrarian people,
Shabbos.
how much of the agrarian people did they take off on Shabbat or not? That I don't know. So, Jack,
Well,
these are
it's
legitimate questions that we don't have an answer to.
right.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay. So the regulations established by sages are, of course, based on the fundamental principles underlying monetary law. The prohibition against taking what belongs to another person: you shall not steal, you shall not defraud your neighbor, neither rob him. The prohibition against deceiving one's neighbor or causing him any type of pain: you shall not deal falsely, neither lie one to another. You shall not exploit one another, and the principles that guide all of the sages' enactments, and you shall do that which is right and good in the sight of the Lord. You shall put the evil away from the midst of you. Okay, so these general principles: don't steal, don't defraud, don't rob, don't deal falsely, don't lie, don't exploit, right? So, but what does that mean? And how do you carry out the general principles in specific cases? So that is what Bhava Bhatra aims to do. By themselves, these principles do not create a basis for organizing economic and social life. The sages therefore instituted a system of rules on the basis of which the practical solutions to real life problems can be established. Since this tractate deals primarily with monetary law and monetary relationships, the principles governing these issues differ in the very essence from those governing ritual matters or the halachot and judgments of the Torah in general. One of the central components is the enormous authority granted to courts to ordain laws and enactments. By power of the principle that property declared ownerless by a court is ownerless, a court is authorized to declare one's property ownerless or grant it to another person. Therefore, whatever is done by power of the court, and in great measure also that which is done by the community's leaders, has the force of halacha, even when not explicitly stated in the Torah. Now, the disbursement of property and ownerless property, we'll see, also affects converts. Right? Let's say a convert dies without having children. So the convert's family are non-Jews. So does the convert's property then revert, as in Jewish cases, to Jewish family members? Or does the convert's property become ownerless because their family is not to be regarded because they're not Jewish? In other words, Jewish courts deal with Jewish people and Jewish property and Jewish items. So how do you deal with a convert who's Jewish, but the convert's family who's not Jewish, right? So by extension, that's what this section deals with too.
Rabbi,
Yes, Julian.
wouldn't that come under the law of the land versus what
Oh,
Rabbi
right.
said?
Yeah, so it's unclear, right? So a convert, a person who converts to Judaism is still a farmer. The convert has land. So, or also,
No,
mo-
I mean the country's
yeah, no,
laws.
I get it. I get it.
Okay, okay,
That like the Roman law. But
right.
so this law, the question is, which applies to every section of the Talmud we're talking about. Do these laws apply independent of the law of the land, or do these law apply, or these laws theoretical? Come the day when we are autonomous as Jews in our land, then this is how it's going to work. So it's unclear, Julian. I think sometimes the Romans would allow Jews to take care of their own business, but I'm not sure the Romans would allow Jews to sell the land if it's if the Romans claim the territory for the Roman Empire. So I don't know. Like, in other words, right, when the Zionist Congress, the World Zionist Congress started in 1897, the idea of establishing a state in Israel meant buying land. So who did you buy land from 1897 to 1917? You bought land from the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans were willing to sell land to Jews. And the Ottomans were selling land even when the farmers, the indigenous farmers, the Arabs who were living in the land, had no idea that the Ottomans were selling land to Jews. So did it work that way back in Roman times? In other words, you had people who had been farming the land for generations, Jews and non-Jews who were living in the land, and then the Romans come along, and then do they survey the land and then say and plot it out and then decide that you have to, do they give a deed to the family that has been working the land for a long time? All these questions, I don't know. There could be answers to those questions in some sources out there, but I'm not familiar with that. So I would tend to think that what we're studying here in Bava Batra, it's like she sells seashells. What we're learning here is theory, because this does not apply to property law in Israel today. There are different laws that apply to property law in Israel that are based on Turkish and British and then other laws. So the Talmud is not the constitution or the law book of the state of Israel today.
Got it. Thanks.
Okay. Another difference between Jewish monetary law and Jewish ritual law follows from the fact that one may give away his money or waive rights granted to him by halakha. For this reason, many of the laws and enactments in this contract are directives for deciding the halakha when no agreement has been reached between the parties.
I have a question.
Yeah.
A question. So you mentioned that in Israel, the Talmud obviously doesn't govern day-to-day life, but if you get a divorce, don't the in your maybe in the Orthodox community, don't the
Except
rabbis decide, hey, you're gonna get this money, you're gonna get this money.
No.
Or
So
property,
the rabbi, the law in Israel is that you have to be married religiously.
Right.
So no matter what religion you are, your religion, you have to go to your religious authority to marry you, and your religious authority divorces you. But to settle, visitation rights and things like that, there's separate. I'm almost sure there's separate divorce court. So
not necessarily.
So it's a very good question, Eric. I don't know if the rabbinic court that handles a divorce also handles all the legal matters. I'm not sure. It's a good question. I really don't know how that works in Israel today. Okay. When the parties are prepared to reach an agreement, they can decide monetary matters between them as they see fit. Tractate Bava Batra addresses four principal issues: relations between neighbors, the halachot of presumption of ownership in deeds, the halachot of sales, and the halachot of inheritance. Most of these halachot are based on chazakah, that is a concept that has multiple meanings, some of which are clarified in this tractate in a comprehensive and profound manner. Chazakah means precedent, but chazakah ritually also means who has priority. So when, like a Kohen has chazakah for the first aliyah, and a Levi has chazakah for the second aliyah. Also, when figuring out who's going to lead the service, a weekday service, you go by who has chazakah. That in other words, somebody saying Kaddish. And then there are degrees of people saying Kaddish. Are you in your year of mourning, or are you observing a yahrzeit? Who has priority? Who has chazakah for doing that? So chazakah, like the editor is suggesting, has different meanings. But here, for monetary laws, who has precedent? In most general sense, a chazakah is a presumption with regard to the nature of reality, And in the special context of this tractate, it's a presumption with regard to the nature and behavior of human beings. That is, how an ordinary person behaves in a particular situation and how an ordinary person understands and formulates agreements. Like, what is general practice? So chazaka is, okay, chazaka in this sense, it sounds like the word chazak meaning strong, but it's lehachzik, to hold on to. What has been held on to? What is the common accepted practice that people hold on to? That's what we're talking about. With regard to the details, there is, of course, room for disagreement. Does one suffer when another can see into his property? And to what extent does he suffer? Like, in other words, are you allowed to build a wall to prevent people from looking in? Are you allowed to prevent somebody from building a window in their house when it's going to look into your house? Is a foul odor or excessive noise beyond what an ordinary person is prepared to accept? At what point does one protest when an unauthorized person uses his property? How long does the average person hold on to written records? Similar questions arise with regard to the halachot of sales. When one buys or sells property, whether by way of a written or an oral agreement, how are his intentions to be understood? Of course, a precise and detailed contract prevents misunderstandings and disagreements. But in the absence of a clear contract, such matters must at times be decided by a court. This tractate provides a definition of certain items, for example, house, vineyard, boat, and the like. What does each of these items include, and what is not included? Right? We're just talking about boats now, and that's page 75, talking about boats. If one buys an item that turns out to be defective or deficient, can he cancel the transaction or demand compensation? When is it said that a defect is insignificant and no reasonable person would raise objections about it? Another fundamental issue in commercial transactions relates to gemirut da'at, final intention, or making up of the mind of the parties to a transaction. Here, too, the matter is decided in accordance with normal human behavior. When is an action performed under compulsion considered void, and when does it have legal force?
Jonah?
Just a second, Eric first.
Okay. So I get it that you live in the United States, and if you want to take your matter to a court, you have that option. But if you live in an Orthodox community,
Yeah.
might you voluntarily keep matters? If you're, let's say you're
Yes.
a shop, you might agree that, hey, we're not going to escalate this to the court. We're going to
Yes.
let the rabbis resolve it.
It depends on the Orthodox community, but yes, there are some, especially ultra-Orthodox communities, that will handle that.
Voluntarily.
Well, even more than voluntarily. It's understood that two ultra-Orthodox Jews going into business together agree that they're going to sign a Jewish contract, and it will be, if there is ever a disagreement, it will be solved by a rabbinic court. Yes. So it does happen, but not too often in America. So in modern Orthodox world, it really doesn't happen that way. The only exemption to that could be the selling of chametz. Like if you own a business, like a bakery, a Jew owns a bakery, they might have some kind of business contract like that with its employees, or also restaurants, maybe for Shabbat, things like that. But otherwise, no, these issues of contract don't really apply today. So it's 10:30, folks, and I'm starting to this year working with the teenagers twice a month. So I really have to end right here for today. Bess, I'm sorry that I can't get to your question. Save it for next week if you remember. And it's good to start another year. Oh, and I even forgot the bracha at the beginning. So I'm not going to say the bracha now at the end, but somebody remind me next week to say the bracha before we start studying.
Can you send us a link for the tractate?
Yes, I can. I can.
Okay, thank you.
You can follow along on Safaria, that for sure, but
Okay.
but the Koran doesn't have, but the Safaria doesn't have the notes or the background that I'll read from Corin. So yeah,
Okay.
when I post the recording, I'll post the link to the to where to get it on Corin.
Okay, good enough. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, guys. Have a good rest of the day.